International terrorism and the effects on U.S. citizens. International terrorism is defined by Laurer and Laurer as politically motivated violence against citizens of political entities different from those of perpetrators in order to coerce and intimidate others into accepting the perpetrator's goals. The problem I'm going to discuss is international terrorism has had an increasingly negative effect on American citizens since 9/11. Um, an awareness of our vulnerability to terrorism was born in every U.S. citizen as a result of the 9/11 terror attacks. And there was a quote in Laura and Laura that I liked. It said, "At 8:46 on the morning of September 11, 2001, the United States became a nation transformed." So basically, what that meant is that an awareness was created in all of us. So the effects of international terrorism on United States citizen is a social problem because the entire country of people are affected versus an individual. So it's not an individual problem, it's a social problem because it's the entire US that's affected by it. The US population believes it's a top issue. In a 2012 Gallup poll, showed 79% of US citizens find the issue of terrorism second only to healthcare in importance. And the effects of international terrorism on American citizens is a social problem because government agencies such as the FBI consider it a social problem. And I found a quote from the director of the FBI, Comey. He said, "We live in a time of persistent terrorist and criminal threats to our national security, our economy, and to our communities." Ways U.S. citizens are affected by international terrorism. The greatest majority of people who have been killed due to terrorism are U.S. citizens, um, meaning it within the U.S. are the U.S. citizens versus military people. So as far as terrorist attacks, it would be the citizens. And a big part of that number, the numbers would be the 9/11 terror attacks, which resulted in the deaths of over 2,900 people. I know our book said 3,000, but when I researched on the National Commission of Terror Attacks, it had pretty much the exact statistics. And in the actual towers, um, approximately 2,600 died, but they're not. I don't think they know the exact amount, so that's why there's no specific amount. Um, and then another way citizens are affected is racial profiling due to the 9/11 attacks, especially those of Middle Eastern descent. And this was from a gentleman, Chief Deputy Director Attorney Peter Siggins. And he stated that racial profiling refers to government activity directed at suspect or group of suspects because of their race, whether intentional or because of disproportionate numbers of contacts based on other pre-contextual reasons. Um, he stated racial profiling can dehumanize U.S. citizens, such as targeting individuals for body searches and interrogations at airports. Actually, he didn't say that. I said that because that's just a known fact based on, the media and everything and the news. We all know that's going on. And then other ways U.S. citizens are affected by international terrorism. Military families, relatives, and friends of soldiers. Families get split up when the soldier is deployed. Internationally, and that would include relatives and friends of soldiers. It's very psychologically damaging. It can cause financial problems, all kinds of problems. It also could lead to the loss of life and broken families. And then soldiers who return from international service could suffer from physical and mental damage for life. contributing factors to international terrorism and related effects on U.S. citizens. Um, this is a quote out of our text by Laura and Laura again. The main purpose of terrorism is not merely to kill people, it is to use killings and the destruction to dramatize conditions that terrorists find unacceptable. And according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, terrorists terrorists create fear amongst the public, try to convince citizens that their government is powerless to prevent terrorism, and they get immediate publicity for their causes. And I put this photo in here of these are Afghanistanis burning the American flag. The presence of U.S. troops in the Middle East puts our country at risk for terrorist attacks. And other contributing factors, news, media, and sensationalism. Social media is a part of our daily lives, as we all know. It's something that we all do. It's our way of communicating now for many of us, especially the younger generation. And it allows U.S. citizens to receive either truth or sensationalism or lies. It's hard to know which is right or truthful and which is not. Like I was going on the government websites, and it seemed to me that it's just stuff I already knew. I didn't think I heard anything, read anything that was different, and I expected to find more, really. Um, some of the social media outlets would be YouTube, which allows terrorists to communicate their messages to be heard by the world, and Twitter allows terrorists to communicate instantly. And the the deputy director of the FBI, Comer, discusses the Islamic State of Islam in Levant, or ISIL, remains committed to instilling fear and attracting recruits. ISIL has issued public statements confirming terrorist organizations determined and dedicate to global terrorism. Their widespread use of social media and growing online support intensified following the commencement of the U.S. airstrikes in Iraq. They've also shown the lengths to which it's willing to go to attract public attention, evident in videos they released depicting the beheading of the American hostages James Foley and Stephen Sotloff. And that's one of the main reasons why I put in the social media, because that was just the most horrifying thing I personally ever saw. To me, it was equivalent to, well, it was a snuff film, and that's totally illegal in our country. And just seeing that was just horrifying. And it was like almost didn't have a choice because I didn't know. I saw it on the news, and it was just horrible. So, and then other contributing factors are, in Laura and Laura, they discuss the levels of social problem, and terrorism falls under the group level. The first level would be the individual level, where the individual may have attitudes, and then you have groups with their terrorist groups, groups such as terrorist groups with political and religious ideologies. And then the next two levels will be government, and the highest level being global. Groups such as ISIL have political and religious ideologies driving them to take over Iraq and Syria, and that's also taken out of our text. War and terrorism are very complex, and the main reason for war and terrorism are politics, religion, and desire for power. And that's just something I stated out of my own knowledge and based on the readings in the text. Consequences if the problem continues. Greater threat to the lives of U.S. citizens in the U.S. and abroad, meaning if U.S. citizens go to travel, they face dangers. I know there was an incident recently. I didn't research and I don't have the quote, the source to quote, but there was a couple Marines or military people that were attacked in one of the Middle Eastern countries, and they were just attacked for being Americans. So just stuff like that could get worse. Some of the FBI director Comer stated some of the things that could happen are assassinations, kidnappings, hijackings, bomb scares, cyber attacks, and then of course the use of chemical, biological, nuclear, and radiological weapons. We could encounter things like travel restrictions, like there may be places we may not be able to go anymore, which I know there already are, but it could get worse. It could cause economic crisis, homegrown violent extremists, which are HVEs, and that I found very interesting. What those are individuals who live in the U.S. and are inspired by the terrorist ideology, and that's Comer gave that quote. And that would be incidents like the Boston bombings. Persons with interests in committing violent extremist acts will be continued to be drawn to the region. Foreign fighters traveling to Syria or Iraq could, for example, gain battlefield experience and increase exposure to violent extremist elements that may lead to further radicalization of violence. And then they could use these skills to return to their countries of origin, including the US, to conduct attacks on the homeland. And I know that in the readings on the FBI site, they are suspect that there are already US citizens that have gone over to join the ISIL forces, and they could come back here for all we know. We have no idea. So Comer places the U.S. most at risk. Places in the U.S. that are at most at risk of attack are military and civilian government facilities, international airports, large cities, high-profile landmarks, large public gatherings, water, food supply, utilities, explosives or chemical and biological agents sent through the mail. And the power to bring about influence and change. I don't think it's a change that can be brought about by an individual. And a charismatic, influential individual may start a group to take up a cause, but the issue is really a global one. And the agency most capable of making a difference is the U.S. government. Our FBI has 103 joint terrorism task forces throughout the United States. And there's also the CIA and the Department of Homeland Security and all kinds of other agencies working to protect our country. Religious organizations could also help by doing this, by going out to the countries where terrorism is, where the roots of terrorism are, and maybe trying to bring about peace. Some of the things that we could do is to impose stricter sanctions on the countries in which terrorism exists. Laura defines sanctions as rewards or punishments designed to influence behavior. And then I found a website called the United States Mission Geneva, Switzerland website, which discussed, it was all about sanctions being imposed on countries that commit acts of terrorism. And it was actually from statement from the U.S. Treasury Department. And in that, they explain that the U.S. Treasury Department and U.S. President can impose financial sanctions on other countries based on terrorist activities. And some of the things, they enforce financial sanctions aimed at weapons procurement rings, narcotics, and criminal cartels, terrorist group, and threatening regimes. The targeted financial sanctions apply concentrated pressure that isolates the terrorists and makes it harder for them to continue their activities. The problem with the U.S. government is that U.S. citizens do not trust the system or its representatives. The government needs to get honest with its people, and its people need to be informed. I found a lot of information on the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services about terrorism, and it talked about some things to look for when you're in a crowd situation, all kinds of interesting information, and nobody ever told me about that, and had I not done this assignment, I wouldn't have found it. So I don't know why we don't all know about websites like this. Why aren't we more educated? And why aren't we told about things the FBI are doing to provide counterterrorism? I know that we're given general information, but I think we really need to be a lot more informed. And the more educated we are, the less likely we are to fall victim to identify or assist in the stopping of a terrorist act.